Good day everyone. Me and my group will report about the process of developing using rubric for non-traditional assessment. Objective. At the end of the lesson, the student must be able to determine the importance of rubric in non-traditional assessment. Use rubric for non-traditional assessment. When you see non-traditional assessment, it refers to alternative assessment. It is the strategies or tools to collect information on student learning. Example, performance-oriented and product-oriented. At the core of alternative assessment is need to design and implement assessment tasks or activities that refrain from using traditional paper and pencil tests, which is typically assess cognitive learnings outcomes and those have right or wrong answer. The three most common models of non-traditional assessment are: number 1, emergency assessment. Emergency assessment. Emergent assessment examines how and what the education program and instruction are doing to address the needs of students. The assessors should have no preconceived notion or biases regarding learning outcomes or instructional goals. With this model, assessment is more qualitative and assessors uses multiple methods to record all data accurately and determine their importance and quality. Hence, categories emerge from observation of the assessors. In this model, direct and indirect evidence of learning are both collected. Direct evidence refers to tangible and compelling evidence of what students have and have not learned, whereas indirect evidence refers to proxy signs for learning that are less tangible and less compelling compared to direct evidence. Number 2, developmental assessment. On the other hand, focuses on determining the extent that students have developed their competencies from instruction. This model adopts a pre-test and post-test methodology to collect information if a student has developed or improved after instruction. It involves a comparison of what students can do different time points and or different contexts. To assess if there is progress, developmental assessment is said to be useful for assessing learning outcome based on student development rather than the final product. Assessors should have adequate knowledge on how a skill or attribute develops so appropriate assessment strategies and tools can be designed. Number 3, authentic assessment is the most model for alternative assessment. It is an approach in the assessment of the student learning that refers to the use of assessment strategies or tools that allow learners or to perform or create a product that is meaningful to the learners as they are based on real-world context. The authenticity of assessment tasks is best described in terms of degree and in terms of presence or absence authenticity.
Good day everyone, I'm Rosario A. Savran. I would like to introduce my topic is all about developing rubrics. What is rubrics? Rubrics is a guide listing specific criteria for grading or scoring academic papers, project, or test. Basically, this tool that teachers and professors use to help them to communicate expectations, provide focused feedback, and grade products. Developing rubrics is a dynamic process, as goals of instructions become clearly to the teacher. The ability to define ranges and levels of execution within the process of the active learning experience will make the development of the rubrics easier. A rubric can be one of the most powerful assessment tools to assess a learner's true ability, provided it is constructed properly. Rubrics take time and effort to develop, however, once they are developed correctly. Here are the 6 steps how to create rubrics. Step 1. Define your goal. Before you can create a rubrics, you need to decide the type of rubrics you'd like to use, and that will largely be determined by your goals for the assessment. Ask yourself the following questions. How detailed do I want my feedback to be? How will I break down my expectation for this project? And are all the tasks equally important? Once you figure out how detailed you'd like the rubrics to be and the goals you're trying to reach, you can choose a type of rubrics. Step 2. Choose a rubric type. Although there are many variations of rubrics, it can be helpful to at least have a standard set to help you decide where to start. Here are 2 that widely used in teaching. First, analytic rubrics. Second is holistic rubrics. We discussed one of the member. Step 3. Determine your criteria. This is where the learning objectives for your unit or course come into play. Here you need to brainstorm a list of knowledge and skills you would like to assess for the project. Group them. Your student, you need to group them accordingly to similarities and get rid of anything that is not absolutely critical. A rubric with too much criteria is difficult to use. Try to stick with 4 to 7 specific subjects for which you'll be able to create to create measurable expectations in the performance levels. All you want to be able to spot the criteria quickly while grading and be able to explain quickly when introducing your students. In analytic rubrics, the criteria are typically listing along the life column. This is the example. Step 4. Create your performance levels. Once you have determined the broad levels you'd like the students to demonstrate mastery of, you will need to figure out what type of scores you will assign based on each level of mastery. Most rating scales include between 3 and 5 levels, or some teachers use in combination of numbers and descriptive labels like 4 for exceptional, 3 for satisfactory, and etc. While other teachers simply assign numbers, percentage, letter grades, or any combination of the three for each level, you can arrange them from highest to lowest or lowest to highest as long as your levels are organized and easy to understand. Step 5. Write descriptors for each level of your rubrics. This is probably your most difficult step in creating a rubrics. Here you will need to write short statements of your expectations underneath each performance levels for every single criteria. The description should be specific and measurable. The language should be parallel to help with students' comprehension, and the degree to which the standards are met should be explained. Again, to use analytic essay rubrics, an example, if your criteria was organization, and you use the 4 per exceptional, 3 satisfactory, 2 developing, and 1 unsatisfactory skill. You would need to write a specific content, and student would need to produce to meet each level. If it could look something like this, for example, 4 for exceptional, 3 for satisfactory, and 2 developing, and 1 unsatisfactory. For example, is our organization. This is the example. And the last steps, how to create rubrics, revise your rubrics. It is important. After creating descriptive language for all levels, making sure it's parallel, specific, and measurable. You need to go back through and limit your rubrics to a single page. Too many parameters will be difficult to assess at once, may be an ineffective way to assist student mastery of a specific standard. Consider the effectiveness of the rubrics, asking for students' understanding and co-teachers' feedback before moving forward. Do not be afraid to revise as necessary. It may even be helpful to grade a simple project in order to effectiveness of your rubrics. You can always adjust the rubrics if need be before handing it out, but once it's distributed, it will be difficult to retract. That's all. Thank you.
Good evening everyone, or good morning kung kailan mo man to pinapanood ang aking report. I hope na marami po kayong matutunan sa aking i-discuss sa ngayong gabi. So, before we start my report, I like to introduce myself. I'm J.R. Managit Espidinia, BEd 2. So, for my reporting tonight is about alternative assessment. So, what is alternative assessment? So, alternative assessment refers to procedure and techniques which can be used within the context of instruction, can because be easy to incorporate into the daily activities of the school or classroom. So, yung alternative assessment ay nagre-refer siya talaga sa procedure and techniques, and also daily activities of the school and classroom. So, ang alternative assessment is merong two categories. Two categories ang alternative assessment. Ano po ba yung two categories of alternative assessment? So, yung categories ng alternative assessment ay isang authentic assessment and performance-based assessment. So, itong dalawang assessment na ito ay nagmi-measure sa student abilities. So, yun. So, doon, yung alternative assessment ay mayroong demonstrate skills and apply knowledge. So, dito, apply knowledge. Sa dalawa na ito, sa kakayahan ng isang alternative assessment ay mayroong connection sa isang Bloom taxonomy. So, ano ba yung Bloom taxonomy? So, ito po ang example ng isang Bloom taxonomy. Kasi dito ay nag-demonstrate siya ng skills and applying knowledge. So, makikita natin dito sa may format sa example ng isang Bloom taxonomy. So, may connection sila sa Bloom taxonomy. So, una-una is remembering. So, recognize and recalling facts. Remembering. So, next is understanding what the facts mean. So, yes. And to apply the facts, rule, concept, and ideas. Breaking down the information into component part. This is analyze and evaluate and create. So that is a Bloom taxonomy examples. So that, what is the benefit of alternative assessment? So there have benefits of alternative assessment. What is that? Does not require to the proctor. 2. Mirror real world activity. So that is a benefits of alternative assessment. 3 is motivating experience. So, and demonstrate, allow to the student to demonstrate mastery of core contents. That is a demonstration. Next, what is a this is a list of pros and cons. What is a pros? Pros is sa Tagalog ay isang kalakasan. So, isang kalakasan yung pros, ibig sabihin ng pros, and ng cons ay isang kahinaan. So, ano ba ang kalakasan at kahinaan ng isang alternative assessment? So, ang pros ay measures student to ability to demonstrate a skills. That is a pros of alternative assessment. So, number 2 is measure student ability to apply knowledge. So, no proctor needed. That is a pros. And mirror real world activity, that is a discussion. And require hard work. What is a cons? Kung sa Tagalog ay kahinaan. So, fewer high stakes in assessment and long grading time. So, magtagal talaga yan. And more preparation time. That is a cons of alternative assessment. That's all my report tonight, and I hope you have a learning in my reporting. Thank you everyone, and God bless.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mendel Aquino Garcia. My topic for today is about how step to design rubrics and terms to be used in rubrics. What are the steps to design a rubrics? Step 1. Define your goal. Before you can create a rubric, you need to decide the type of rubric you'd like to use, and that will largely be determined by your goals for the assessment. Step 2. Choose a rubric type. Although there are many variations of rubrics, it can be helpful to at least have a standard set to help you decide where to start. Here are the two that are widely used in teaching as defined by analytic rubrics. This is the standard grid rubric that many teachers routinely uses to assess students' work. This is the optimal rubric for providing clear, detailed feedback. With an analytic rubric, criteria for the student's work is listed in the left common and performance level as listed across the top. Second, holistic rubric. This is the type of rubric that is much easier to create but much more difficult to use accurately. Typically, a teacher provides a series of letter grades or a range of numbers, 1 to 4 or 1 to 6 for example, and then assign expectations for each of those scores. Step 3. Determine your criteria. This is where the learning objectives for your unit of course come into play. Here you'll need to brainstorm a list of knowledge and skills you would like to assess for the project. Step 4. Create your performance levels. Once you have determined the broad levels you would like the student to demonstrate mastery of, you will need to figure out what types of scores you will assign based on each level of mastery. Most rating scales include between 3 or 5 levels. Some teachers use a combination of numbers and descriptive labels like 4, exceptional, 3, satisfactory. Step 5. Write descriptors for each level of your rubric. This is probably your most difficult step in creating a rubric. Here you will need to write short statement of your expectation underneath each performance level for every single criteria. The descriptions should be specific and measurable. Step 6. Revise your rubric. After creating the descriptive language for all of the levels, making sure it is parallel, specific, and measurable. You need to go back through and limit your rubric to a single page. Too many parameters will be difficult to assess at once and may be an ineffective way to assess student mastery of a specific standards. Consider the effectiveness of the rubric, asking for student understanding and co-teacher feedback before moving forward. Do not be afraid to revise as necessary. It may even be helpful to grade a sample project in order to gauge the effectiveness of your rubric. You can always adjust the rubric if need be before handing it out, but once it's distributed, it will be difficult to retract. Terms to be used in a rubric. Different assignment types may require different grading scales and different numbers of levels. As you develop your rubric, decide how many different levels it should have. For example, you may choose a rubric with 3 or 4 levels for an easy assignment, while a 1-level rubric or credit, no credit may be useful for smaller assignment and save you time when grading. You may also consider whether the list the highest possible level of achievement first or last. Be mindful with your word choice with labeling your rating scales, especially if the grading rubrics will be shared with the student. As Stephen and Levy note, labeling the levels on the scale can be a delicate matter. We need to be clear about expectation and about failures as well as successes. Yet, we also try to avoid overly negative or competitive labels. This can discourage students. 3 levels. Weak, satisfactory, strong. Beginning, intermediate, high. Weak, average, excellent. Developing, competent, exemplary. Low mastery, average mastery, high mastery. 4 levels. Unacceptable, marginal, proficient, distinguished. Beginning, developing, accomplished, exemplary. Needs improvement, satisfactory, good, accomplished. Emerging, progressing, partial, mastery, mastery. Not yet competent, partly competent, competent, sophisticated. Inadequate, needs improvement, meets expectations, exceed expectation. Poor, fair, good, excellent. 5 levels. Poor, minimal, sufficient, above average, excellent. Novice, intermediate, proficient, distinguished, master. Unacceptable, poor, satisfactory, good, excellent. 6 levels. Unacceptable, emerging, minimally, acceptable, acceptable, accomplished, exemplary. Thank you for listening.
Good day, everyone. I'm Rika J. Midel, and I'm going to report and discuss to you the important elements of the rubric. So again, what is a rubric? A rubrics is a scoring guide or tool used to evaluate a performance, a product, or a project and is based upon a specific set of criteria. So, for an instance, in a classroom situation, a teacher is given his students a task wherein they are going to make a poster making on their subject, which is art. So, in order for the teacher to score and rate the output of the students, he must make a rubric. And this one is the example of a rubric. The rubrics has three important elements, namely the first one, which is criteria. The second one is the levels of performance. And lastly is the descriptors or the indicator. What is a criteria? One or more traits or dimensions that serves as the basis for judging the student response. So let us go back to our previous example of a rubric. So dito sa ating example ay makikita natin ang criteria sa first row. So dito nakalagay ang use of theme, pictures or graphics, required elements, visual clarity and appeal, and lastly content, spelling, grammar, punctuation. So yun ang mga examples ng criteria. Next is the levels of performance. It is a scale of values on which to rate each dimensions. Yung levels of performance naman ay makikita sa upper part ng rubrics. Itong nakalagay na 4, 3, 2, 1 na scale. Minsan din ay words yung nakalagay which are excellent, good, satisfactory, and needs improvement. Lastly is the descriptors or the indicators. This is where the spell out of what is expected of the students at each level of performance for each criterion. This is the example and it is seen in the center of the rubrics. For a recap, let us always put in mind that the rubrics has three important elements, which are the criteria, the levels of performance, and lastly, the descriptors or the indicators.
Good evening, everyone. I am Rose Ann Perez Catalunya, and this is my report. My topic is about types of rubrics. There are 4 types of rubrics. First, analytical rubric. An analytical rubric resembles a grid with the criteria for a student product listed in the leftmost column and with the levels of performance listed across the top row, often using numbers and or descriptive tags. Analytical rubrics is about the cells within the center of the rubric may be left blank or may contain descriptions of what the specified criteria look like each level of performance. When scoring with an analytical rubric, each of the criteria is scored individually. And the advantages of analytic rubrics is it provide useful feedback on areas of strength and weakness. Criterion can be weighted to reflect the relative importance of each dimension. And the disadvantages of analytic rubrics is takes more time to create and use than a holistic rubric. Unless each point for each criterion is well defined, graders may not arrive at the same score. The second types of rubrics is developmental rubrics. The main distinction between developmental rubrics and other analytic trait rubrics is that the purpose of developmental rubric is not to evaluate an end product or performance. Instead, developmental rubrics are designed to answer the question to what extent are students who engage in our programs, services, developing skills, value, ability, and many more. Generally, this type of rubric would be based on a theory of development. the advantages of developmental rubric. The advantages of developmental rubrics is useful when the goal of evaluation is to determine level of development rather than quality of a final product. Especially when there is no expectation that students should or could fully develop a skill or ability during the course of their education or potential ever, such as in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There is no expectation people can or will become self-actualized. Rubric can be based on relevant development theory. The disadvantages of developmental rubric is conceptually, this type of rubric is more difficult to design. Developing a developmental rubric requires a close tie between assessment criteria and the theory of development. And third, the holistic rubric. A holistic rubric consists of a single scale with all criteria to be included in the evaluation being considered together. For example, the clarity, clarify, organization, and mechanics. With a holistic rubric, the rater assigns a single score, usually on 1 to 4 or to 1 to 6 point scale, based on an overall judgment of the student work. The rater matches an entire piece of student work to a single description on the scale. The advantages of holistic rubric is emphasis on what the learner is able to demonstrate rather than what she cannot do. Saves time by minimizing the number of decisions raters make. Can be applied consistently by trained raters, increasing reliability. The disadvantages of holistic rubric is does not provide specific feedback for improvement. When student work is at varying levels spanning the criteria points, it can be difficult to select the single best description. Criteria cannot be weighted. Last, the checklist. A distinct type of rubric where there are only 2 performance levels possible. Checklists tend to be longer than other types of rubrics since each aspect of performance you are looking for students' work performance essentially becomes its own criterion. When you are using a checklist, every decision is binary. Yes or no, or present or absent, pass, fall, etc. Most rubrics can be converted rather than directly into a checklist. For example, here is a rubric for grading journal entries. The advantages of checklist. The advantages of checklists are generally a simpler and faster way to grade than using a more traditional rubric since you are making discrete decisions for each individual performance criterion rather than trying to determine where students' work fall into performance criteria that generally encompass a range of different performance expectations.
So, good morning everyone. I am Lemuel Apelacio for reporter number 4 for this final. So, before I introduce my topic, I would like to congratulate all of us for successful reporting for this final. I hope everyone would have learn to our group reporting. Now, my topic is what type of rubrics work for your purpose. Before I introduce my explanation, now what is a rubrics? A rubrics is a great of tool of teacher because it is a simple way to set up a grading criteria for assignment. Not only is the tool useful for teachers, it is helpful for students as well. A rubrics defines in writing what is expected to the student to get a particular grade on an assignment. Now, what is the importance of rubrics? The words rubrics comes from the Latin words for read or the online or the Merriam Dictionary or something like that. Is the first meaning of rubric as an authoritative rule, and the fourth meaning as a guide listing specific criteria for grading or scoring academic papers, projects, or tests. Now, what is rubrics? A rubrics is a coherent set of criteria for students. Works that includes descriptions of level of performance, quality on the criteria. Sounds simple enough, right? Unfortunately, these definitions of rubric is rarely demonstrated in practice. The internet, for example, offers many rubrics that do not in fact describe performance. I think I know why that might be and will explain that in. But for now, let's start with the positive. It should be clear for the definition that rubrics have two major aspects: coherent sets of criteria and descriptions of level of performance for these criteria. Now, what is the purpose of rubrics? Like any other evaluation tool, rubrics are useful for certain purposes and not for others. The main purpose of rubrics is to assess performances. For some performances, you observe the student in the process of doing something, like using an electric drill or discussing an issue. For other performances, you observe the product that is a result of the student work, live finished book shelf, or a written report. School performances that can be assessed with rubrics. The list by no means cover every possible school performance. It is just meant to help you think of the types of performances you might assess with a rubrics. Now, how do rubrics enhance student learning? Rubrics can enhance student learning by having consistency in the way teachers score individual assignment, as well as keeping consistency between the ways different teachers score are the same assignment. Rubrics can also improve student learning by allowing students to peer assess and self-assignment. Student enhance the learning, or let's say rubrics can enhance student learning. Yes, when the students are made aware of the rubrics prior to instruction, they know the level of performance that is expected and can become more motivated to learn and reach those students or those standards. Rubrics can make the targets of instruction clear, especially for problem solving, group process skills, and writing. Rubrics are easy to understand and easy to explain, which is why they have become so popular among teachers, parents, and also the student. Rubrics often help the student make progress in their assignment or projects, while also helping students stay on the right track to finish a quality assignment or projects. Student learning can improve greatly through the use of rubrics because of how it makes instruction clear and how it keeps student on track to complete quality homework. Now, rubrics is one of the important during our uh, conducting of quizzes, tests, and other performance bases. Rubrics can enhance student by learning by having consistency in the way teachers score individual assignment as well as keeping consistency between the ways different teachers score are the same assignment. Rubrics can also improve student learning by allowing students to peer assess and self-assess assignments. Through scoring guidelines, students can learn the value of giving and getting feedback from themselves and others. Through rubrics may seem a simple way to score the assignment or the test. That was very important when it comes to scoring of our student. Now, the using of rubrics in as assessment is to like we said, rubrics can offer the opportunity for peer assessment after the student finish project or assignments. In general, the teacher can disperse the assignment to different students to compare the assignment to the rubrics, which specific guidelines right into front of them. Student can grade other student with less bias. So that was the using of rubrics to know your score, your performance-based assessment. All your score can recorded in the rubrics. So teachers can allow students to grade other students since there are specific guidelines and instruction for how to score the test or the quizzes, the exams, and also the assignments. It is advantageous for students who learn how to give and receive of feedbacks. That would be all. This is group 4 reporting for finals. I hope you have a learnings comes from me. So that was the end of my reporting. I am Lemuel Apelacio with a control number 3050, and thank you and good evening.